40 years of wandering in the desert under God's judgment, and those years were filled with funerals. Day after day after day, they experienced funerals. Probably multiple funerals every single day for 40 years. Over 14,000 days of funerals because of God's judgment. An entire generation was under the judgment of God because they did not believe him in regard to the promised land. And that entire generation was told that every one of them would die while everybody wandered in the wilderness because they did not listen to the Lord. And so their kids got to see their parents, their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, their friends die day after day after day as a reminder of God's judgment. I mean, just imagine 14,000 days of multiple funerals. Judgment. And then the day came when the last funeral occurred. And no one else was left in the generation under God's judgment. And they came to the edge of the promised land. And they were going to leave the wilderness of graves and go into the land flowing with milk and honey. Perhaps that was the moment that Moses told the story of Noah. A story of profound judgment, but a story that is more about the significance of grace than it is of judgment. An entire nation coming out of judgment, looking at the unimaginable grace of the promised land. The story of Noah would have been a great encouragement to the people of Israel. In Genesis chapter 6, Moses begins to give us the account of the story of Noah by giving us the state of the world, and it's not very good. In fact, it's pretty bad. So bad that it grieves the heart of God, and God says, I'm going to destroy everything. He just confirms this unbelievable, unimaginable degree of judgment upon the entire world. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Now it came about, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. And the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth. He was grieved in his heart. The Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. So God looks at the world and says the state of the world is it's terrible, full of wickedness and evil. Now, we probably want to answer the question, who are the sons of God and the daughters of men? I mean, that's probably why you came tonight, is to figure out what that really is all about. And as you trace the story of Genesis from the time of the fall, and you hear about the seed of the woman, you see Genesis tracing both the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And what you have is you have Cain and you have Abel. And you have Abel who becomes evidently the seed of the woman that is talked about in Genesis 3, because Abel is trusting the Lord, and Cain does not trust the Lord, and he attacks the seed of the woman. Hence, he is the seed of the serpent. And so you have the line of the seed of the serpent attacking the line of the seed of the woman. And you have that go on through Abel is killed. God replaces Abel with Seth. And then people begin to call upon the Lord. So you see, Seth is the answer to the absence of the seed of the woman, because obviously Cain has rejected who God is and what God has said. And so then it lines up the lineage or the descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth. Seth's descendants are calling upon the Lord. Cain's descendants are getting worse and worse, hence the explanation of Lamech and how terrible he is. Sin is just multiplying in Cain's descendants. And so when you come to Genesis chapter 6, you hear the sons of God and the daughters of men become married to each other. And so the sons of God, being those who are following God, Seth's lineage, are intermarrying with Cain's lineage, and the worldliness, the river of worldliness, is causing everyone to drift along into more ungodliness. Now, that's not the only way that passage has been understood, but I think it fits contextually with what's happening in Genesis. Now, you can look into the other ways and how that plays out with the sons of God being angels or demons and things like that. And you can land anywhere you want to within the biblical possibilities. But I will say this, no matter where you land in understanding the sons of God and the daughters of men, you will land at the same place, that everything is a complete wreck. And God says, I'm going to wipe everyone and everything out on the face of the earth. He's grieved in his heart. Which, if you're thinking about this story from the perspective of Israel, and that's what I want you to do tonight, I want you to think about what would it be like to be on the edge of the promised land and having seen thousands upon thousands of funerals over 40 years and see an entire generation die out under God's judgment and be at the edge of the promised land fixing to step into unimaginable grace. What would it be like to hear this story and to understand what God is communicating in the story of Noah that might impact how you enter the promised land? So if you're listening to this story where God says, I'm going to wipe out everything on the face of the earth, you've got to ask the question as Israelite, what about the seed of the woman? If you're going to wipe out everyone on the face of the earth, what's going to happen with the promise back in Genesis chapter 3? And then we hear verse 8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. These are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And here the earth is completely wicked. All the intent of the heart is evil continually. God says, I'm going to wipe out everybody. But God has made a promise that the seed of the woman would be the answer to the problem of sin. And here, when sin is prevailing and judgment is promised, God shows favor to Noah. Now, I don't want you to think that when the scripture says that Noah was righteous and blameless, that the scripture is conveying that Noah merited the right to be saved from the flood. Noah is not perfect. He is not sinless. What this is telling us is that God sees him as unique among all the people on the earth. And what makes Noah unique is the very reason he found favor from God. God extended grace to Noah that Noah did not deserve in the midst of all this evil, because Noah believed what God said. Noah had faith, and through faith he received grace and favor. And God attributes to him a description of one who is righteous and living with integrity in a generation that has no integrity. This man, through faith, experienced God's grace. This whole New Testament concept of grace through faith finds its first very clear expression right here in the story of Noah. And I want you to see how the story of Noah actually unfolds this perspective that Noah believes, that Noah listens to everything that God says, he believes it and he does it. And that is the reason why he experiences the grace of God. being delivered in the midst of great judgment, experiencing grace in the middle of profound judgment. It's through faith. And what we hear next in Genesis here is that God tells Noah about what's going to happen. He says to Noah in verse 13, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them, and behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth." And he says, "Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood, and you shall make the ark with rooms, and shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you're to make it." He gives the dimensions. He talks about the ark, how it's going to look, what's going to be happening. Verse 17, even I am bringing flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall perish. In verse 18, "I will establish my covenant with you. You shall enter the ark, you and your sons, your wife, your sons' wives with you, and every living thing of all flesh. You shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of the animal after their kind, after every creeping thing on the ground after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. As for yourself, take some of all the food which is edible, gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them." So God tells Noah what he's supposed to do. He tells him about the ark, the dimensions of the ark, how he's going to build it, lays out the floor plans. Now think about what's just happened. Noah's been told to build an enormous boat. He doesn't even, think about this. This is crazy. He's going to build a boat in the middle of nowhere close to anything that's going to be able to float that boat. It's going to be something that's bigger than about 1.5 football fields. It's going to take him probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 years to build the thing. And what does the scripture say that he does when God tells him, this is what I'm going to do, this is what you're going to do, and this is what's going to happen? Verse 22, "Thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did." Noah listened to what God said and believed. It was his faith through which he experienced the great grace of God in the middle of judgment like the world had never seen. Faith. It continues. Chapter 7, verse 1. "Then the Lord said to Noah, enter the ark, you and all your household. For you alone I've seen to be righteous before me in this generation. You shall take with you of every clean animal by 7. He goes on and tells them about how he's supposed to take these clean animals. Then verse 5, again we hear, Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. Once again, Noah is listening to what God says, and he believes it, and we know that he believes it because he does exactly what God says. God continues. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came on the earth, and Noah and his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the waters of the flood, the clean animals, all the animals go in. Then verse 9, there went into the ark to Noah by 2s, male and female, as God commanded Noah. So once again, we see things coming together in such a way that we have evidence that Noah listened and believed and was doing exactly what God said he should do. And so he was experiencing the grace of God as promised to him. All right, drop down. Verse 12, the rains fell upon the earth 40 days, 40 nights. Now we get a kind of a flashback. Verse 13, on the very same day, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, the sons of Noah, Noah's wife, 3 wives of his sons with them, entered the ark. Every beast is kind of a recap, but it's a recap to stress verse 16. Those that entered, male and female of all flesh, entered as God commanded him. And the Lord closed the door behind them. Once again, we are given this picture of Noah doing exactly what God said. And because of Noah's faith in what God said, Noah entered the ark of his salvation. And God shut the door, sealing the salvation of Noah and everyone in the ark through their faith. It wasn't that Noah merited being saved. It's that Noah believed. And through his faith, in the midst of the greatest judgment upon the world, he experienced grace. By the way, the writer of Hebrews, as he reads the account of Noah, you know what his conclusion is? Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7 says that Noah was an heir of righteousness which comes by faith. Noah was credited righteousness by his faith. Does that sound familiar to anyone? I mean, this is the gospel. And it's being displayed and conveyed to an entire generation who has just experienced God's judgment and are ready to enter the promised land. And they are told, when you come into this land, you will live long in this land and experience blessing after blessing after blessing if you believe me. But if you come into this land and you don't listen to me and you don't believe me, you will be judged. You will die. They'd just seen 40 years of it. And now they're fixing to go in. And a story like Noah is an incredible encouragement for them to go in and believe every single thing that God says. So Noah and his family are in the ark, and the flood comes. For 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark, verse 17, so that it rose above the earth. The water prevailed increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. And we continue through, and everything is wiped out. Here in chapter 7, the flood goes over the mountains. There's nothing on the earth but water. Now that ought to make you recall Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, that water covered the earth and everything was chaos and void. Well, here we are back at that same picture because God says, I'm going to wipe everything out. But the difference between Genesis 1 and now Genesis 7 is that Genesis 7, there's this little ark floating in the void. And inside that ark is a man and his family who have had faith in a God who says, I'm going to bring grace in the midst of judgment. And everything is different. And instead of seeing complete chaos, we instead see the embryo of a new beginning, a brand new start with a man who believes. And we hear the sweetest words of grace in Genesis chapter 8. But God remembered Noah. God's wiping out the earth in judgment. But we're reminded that it's not just about judgment. Because God remembers Noah, we ought to see judgment as also cleansing. He's cleansing the entire earth to make it ready for the grace of his gift of life he's granted to Noah and his family through their faith. We're seeing these cleansing and making it ready. His judgment is not just eradicating the wickedness, it's also preparing for this gracious gift of life that Noah has been given through faith. God remembered Noah. In the middle of all that Noah faced for those decades and decades of building that ark, all the controversy and the difficulty, he stepped into that ark because he believed. He laid every a beam of that ark because he believed. Every piece of sweat that fell off of his face was a work born of faith. And here he is in the ark, in the swell of the flood. It covers the earth, and God remembers him. No matter what your life may look like, in this worldly place, please don't forget that God is looking to remember people who believe. God remembered Noah and we see the flood waters receding. He causes a wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. And all the water is going down, and Noah begins to send out some birds, and they come back, and they sends them out, they come back, sends them out, and then eventually they don't come back. And so he knows things are in good shape. In verse 13, "Now it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month." You hear all those firsts? This is a new beginning. This is the earth that's been cleansed. And this is a man who's walking in grace. And this new beginning starts so wonderfully. Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. In the second month, the 27th day of the first of the month, the earth was dry, and God spoke to Noah, saying, "Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply." So Noah went out, and his sons and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moved on the earth, they went out by their families from the ark. And Noah built an altar to the Lord. And he took every clean animal and of every clean bird, and he offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, "I will never again curse the ground on account of man. For the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. And I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." The Lord at this point is saying to himself, he's going to later say to Noah something very similar to what he just said. But I want you to take notice that God, in saying he's not going to bring the same destruction on the earth that he just brought, also affirms that the intent of man's heart is still evil. So how is it that God's not going to bring this judgment again, but there's still the problem of sin? You see, God has a plan, and it rests in the seed of the woman. So God blesses Noah and his sons and says to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." This is where God's giving his instructions to the new Adam, the beginning here. We're starting over. And so he's giving his instructions to Noah. And notice things have changed just a little bit. He wants them to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. But notice in verse 2, "The fear of you and the terror of you will be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the sky and everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are given." And so God says you're going to have dominion over everything. Everything's going to be afraid of you, and everything belongs to you. And he says in verse 3, "Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant." So now, we can eat meat. Praise God for Genesis chapter 9. And so now they can eat of the animals. And God requires just one thing, that mankind shows respect for God being the life giver. And it's asked to be shown in how they take the life of an animal and how they do not take the life of another human being. And so part of the obligation they are under in this relationship with God is showing respect to God and showing respect to life. It continues in verse 7, "As for you, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth abundantly and multiply in it." Verse 8, "Then God spoke to Noah and his sons, saying, Now behold," now here's where we get God telling Noah what we just heard God talk about in the end of chapter 8. So God says to Noah, verse 9, "Now behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, every beast of the earth with you, and all that comes out of the ark, even every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by the water of the flood. Neither shall there be again a flood to destroy the earth." So God makes a covenant with Noah and everyone after him that he will never again destroy the earth by a flood. All right, he started over. He cleansed of all wickedness. He has a man who's living by faith, experiencing his grace. He has a brand new start. And what does he say? I'm never going to do again what I just did. And it has nothing to do with you. There's no conditions placed on Noah. There's no if you obey me. It's just, this is what I'm going to do. God is communicating that he has a plan, and it does not ever involve, again, destroying the earth through a flood. He has given a covenant of grace that depends totally on his willingness to preserve, and his preservation has everything to do with the seed of the woman. And so God makes this covenant with Noah and all living things. And he sets this sign of the covenant. Verse 12, God said, "This is the sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. I set my bow, the rainbow, in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow will be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the cloud, then I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." And God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." God makes this covenant, gives the sign of the covenant, the rainbow, so that symbol of God's power and authority to judge is a reminder that he has promised not to judge by way of the flood. So God makes a covenant. He gives direction. Noah and his family are ready to serve the Lord and honor him. They come out of the ark. They sacrifice to the Lord, experience his blessing, and they're ready to start brand new. Verse 18. Now the sons of Noah came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah. From these the whole earth was populated. We just have the population of the entire earth traced back all the way to these three guys with Noah, their father, who experienced the incredible, unimaginable grace of God in the midst of unbelievable judgment, precisely through his faith. He is the testimony to every generation that you experience God's grace, even in the midst of unbelievable judgment upon sin, through faith. Well, this new beginning took a turn. Verse 20. Then Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine, became drunk, uncovering himself inside the tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and went and told his two brothers outside. I guess he thought that they would laugh with him. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, so they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. And so he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." And then Noah lived 350 years after the flood, so all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. If you're an Israelite in that generation that is at the edge of the promised land, and you hear how sin creeps back in, and you hear about the curse on Ham, what does that do for you when you've been told you're going to go in and be the tool of judgment on the Canaanites? What registers in your mind when you recognize that Shem is the great, 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 on and on grandfather of Abraham? And now the line of Shem, blessed seed of the woman, is going in by grace through believing and going to receive life in a land in the midst of judgment upon Canaan. Are you not encouraged to believe that God has a plan? But the fact is, sin continues to wage war. And we see here the end of this account is an evidence that even though God started afresh with Noah, the problem still exists. The heart of man is bent towards evil continually. And so it just might be that the rainbow in the sky wasn't just evidence that God would not bring flood of judgment, but was a continual reminder that as long as sin is present, God has a plan for judging sin. God hates sin, and He's judged it since the moment sin began. And He's not going to stop judging it. He is going to judge sin, but you notice every time in Scripture we see the judgment of God laid out on sins of people, there is always grace that's been offered and given to those who listen to the Lord. Think about the story as this unfolds. You have sin waging war. Sin wages war against Adam and Eve. And they're kicked out of the garden in judgment. And then sin wages war against Cain. And Cain kills Abel. Judgment. But God gives Eve a son to replace Abel. Seth. Grace. And people call upon the name of the Lord. But the line of Cain and the line of Seth intermarry, and they go down the river of wickedness. And God brings judgment. And He wipes out the world, but He rescues Noah. Judgment and grace. It's always there. You can see it at the Tower of Babel. You can see it at Sodom and Gomorrah. You can see it in the exile of Israel. You can see it all through the Old Testament, that God brings judgment upon sin because He hates sin, but He always brings a thread of grace to those who listen to Him. And all of what's happening in the Old Testament with God bringing judgment again and again on sin, but offering grace to those who believe, is all pointing to a moment in history when God will pour out His judgment on the seed of the woman so that everyone who believes in the seed of the woman might escape judgment and live forever in grace that always prevails over judgment. But it only happens through faith. If you're an Israelite standing at the edge of the promised land, and you've just walked through judgment that you cannot even imagine. And God says to you, I've set before you today life and death. Believe me, and you will live. And you remember the story of Noah, a story of judgment that was far more than what you experienced. And yet in the middle of that judgment, God remembered a man who believed. And He put him in an ark. And He saved him. And He gave the world a new start. And here you are at the point of a new beginning. You're fixing to walk into the promised land. And you believe that God has a plan of grace that He is ready to extend if you believe. I love that story of encouragement because in so many ways, it's our story. I mean, think about it. Don't think about the story of Noah just from the edge of the promised land as an Israelite. Think about the story of Noah on just this side of heaven. Here we stand, looking at the promised land of heaven, in a world that is filled with complete and total wickedness, ungodliness, and a disrespect for the one who created it. And here we stand in the midst of it, and we can look and see that heaven has been promised. And guess what? God has provided an ark. And the ark for you and me is the Son of God, who will carry us through the waters of judgment into the land of promise forever. The question is, will we really believe that the only way into the promised land is still faith? Will you listen to what God has said and believe him? I doubt that anybody in here is going to be told by God to build an ark of gopher wood in the next week. If you are, I'm going to have you see a friend of mine who's a specialist. I mean, it's just not going to happen. But listen to this. You know what? God's going to speak to you. You know one of the things that God has said to you? God has said to you, I'm going to destroy the world. And every time you see a rainbow, you remember both of my promises. I'm never going to do it by water, but I'm most definitely going to do it by fire. You've been told that something far worse than a flood is coming. And God's not just going to erase life. He's going to judge every soul that's ever lived. And he has told us. And the only way to enter the ark of Christ is through faith. And if you've entered the ark of your salvation, I suspect we will see it. Just like we saw Noah's faith out there banging on those pieces of wood for 100 years. No question he believed. None of us have lived in a land as wicked as Noah, and he never stopped living by faith. Here we are in our world, and we know a flood is coming. The door of the ark has not yet been closed. God has provided the ark. We don't have to build it. But you know what he's asked us to do? You know what he's commanded us to do? To go and get people to get in that ark with us. And I hope and pray that as God looks across our congregation, he will say, I have found you to be righteous in this generation because you believe what I've said. And when I commanded you to go and tell others about the ark of Jesus Christ, you did all that I commanded you. Be encouraged and know that grace only comes through faith, and take that message to a world that will be judged.